My maid of honor spiked my drink at my engagement party and filmed it, but she never knew the bartender was watching her do it. I woke up on a stranger's couch with my dress inside out and 43 text messages waiting on my phone, and the first one I opened had a video attached with my own name in the caption. And underneath it, someone had written, "Watch what Ashley Cole did at her own engagement party." I want to tell you how I got there because if you only saw the video, you'd think you already knew me, and you'd be wrong. My name is Ashley Cole. I was 27 years old, and up until that morning, I was the kind of woman other women asked to be their designated driver. I don't say that to sound self-righteous, it's just true. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, in a house where my father drank on Friday nights, and my mother pretended not to notice, and by the time I was 12, I'd learned to read a room the way other kids read comic books, fast and instinctively looking for the moment things were about to go sideways. So I became careful. Careful with money, careful with men, careful with how much wine I let myself have at a party, because I had watched what happened to people who weren't careful, and I never wanted to be one of them. I met Jason Whitfield when I was 24, at a tire shop of all places, because my car had a slow leak, and he was the guy who found it, patched it, and then told me I didn't need the 4 new tires the front desk had tried to sell me. That was Jason in a sentence. He ran Whitfield Auto on Route 4 with his older brother, and he had this way of looking at a problem like it was just a puzzle that hadn't been solved yet, never panicked, never dramatic. 3 years later, he proposed to me in the parking lot of that same shop, down on one knee next to the bay where we'd met, grease still under his fingernails, and I said yes before he even finished the sentence. My best friend for the engagement was supposed to be Megan Fairweather. I use the word supposed to on purpose now, but back then I would have told you Megan was the truest friend I had. We met in nursing assistant training when we were 20, and she was the one who sat with me in the hospital parking lot the night my father had his first heart attack, not saying anything, just handing me tissues and letting me cry into her shoulder until my mascara ruined her blouse. She had a laugh you could hear from across a restaurant, the kind that made strangers look over and smile without knowing why. She was maid of honor. She was the one who planned the engagement party. I want to be fair to who Megan actually was, not just who she turned out to be, because I think it's too easy to look backward and repaint someone as a villain from the very first scene. And that's not honest. Megan grew up 2 towns over from me, in Fairborn, the only daughter of a mother who worked double shifts at a diner and a father who left when Megan was 9 and never really came back into the picture, except for the occasional birthday card with $20 folded inside. She used to joke in a way that always had a hard edge underneath it, that she'd learned early how to make people like her because liking her was the only leverage she'd ever had. I didn't think much of that joke at the time. I think about it differently now. Megan was generous in the specific way that people are generous when they need to be needed. Always the first to show up with soup when you were sick, always remembering the exact date of your worst breakup so she could check in on the anniversary, and for years that generosity felt like love, because it functioned like love, even if underneath it there was something more complicated going on. Some old hunger from being the girl whose father sent $20 instead of showing up. Jason and Megan had known each other almost as long as Megan and I had, because the 3 of us had ended up in the same friend circle by our early 20s, one of those groups that forms around a shared apartment complex and a handful of mutual friends and then just calcifies into something permanent. For most of that time, the dynamic between the 3 of us felt easy and uncomplicated, the kind of friendship where Megan would tease Jason about his terrible taste in classic rock, and he'd threaten to make her actually listen to a full Zeppelin album front to back. And I never once, not for a single second in 3 years, thought there was anything underneath that teasing besides genuine affection between old friends. I want to be clear about that because I think there's a version of this story where people assume I must have missed obvious signs for years, and that's not what happened. Whatever changed in Megan, changed recently, changed specifically in the months leading up to our engagement, not slowly over years the way some resentments build. My mother used to say that the people who hurt you worst are rarely strangers. They're the ones who already know exactly where the soft places are. And I understood that sentence academically for most of my life before I understood it the way you understand something that has actually happened to you. I want to tell you 2 or 3 small things now because they're going to matter later, and I didn't understand that at the time. The first thing is that Megan had started leaving her phone face down on tables about 4 months before the party. She'd always been someone who left her phone lit up and visible, texting mid-conversation, not caring who saw. Then, sometime in the spring, she started turning it over the second she set it down, and if it buzzed, she'd glance at it and put it back face down again without saying who it was. The second thing is that Jason had been staying late at the shop more than usual, which he explained by saying his brother's transmission specialist quit and they were short staffed. And I believed him because I had no reason not to, and because Jason had never once given me a reason to doubt him in 3 years. The third thing is a comment Megan made in April when we were dress shopping for the party, and I tried on a green wrap dress that Jason had once told me he loved. Megan looked at me in the mirror and said, some men like it when their fiancés wear something new, something they haven't seen 100 times, like it's a whole different woman. I laughed it off at the time. I didn't think about it again until much later, when it stopped being a throwaway line and started sounding like something else entirely. The engagement party was set for the second Saturday in June at a rented barn venue out past Springfield that Megan had found and insisted on booking herself. Said it would be her gift to us, her treat completely. We didn't need to see the invoice. I should have thought that was strange. A maid of honor covering an entire venue rental on a nursing assistant's salary. I didn't. I was too busy being grateful. The first real crack, the first moment I felt something was wrong instead of just being slightly off, happened 3 weeks before the party. I stopped by Megan's apartment to drop off some mason jars for the centerpieces, and her door was unlocked, which was unusual for her. She was religious about locking up. I let myself in, calling her name, and I heard her voice from the bedroom, low, urgent, the specific tone people use when they don't want to be overheard. I caught 4 words before she noticed me standing in the hallway. She said, "Not until after the wedding." Well, after. Then she came around the corner with her phone already pressed to her chest, screen against her shirt, and she smiled at me in a way that didn't reach her eyes and said, "Sorry, that was my cousin. Family drama. You know how it is." I did know how it is, or I thought I did, and I let it go, because that's what you do with people you trust. You give them the benefit of the doubt so many times that by the time you run out of doubt to give, you've already lost the ability to see clearly. I remember the specific details of that apartment more than I'd like to, the way you remember the layout of a room right before something in your life changes, even if nothing dramatic happened in that room at all. Megan's apartment always smelled like the vanilla candles she bought in bulk from the discount store off Route 35, and that day was no different. Vanilla and something faintly like burnt coffee from a pot she'd forgotten on the warmer. There were mason jars stacked along her kitchen counter, some already wrapped in the burlap ribbon she'd chosen for the centerpieces, and I set the box I was carrying down next to them before I heard her voice from down the hallway. I want to tell you that some instinct in me went cold the moment I heard that tone, but that would be giving myself more credit than I deserve. What I actually felt was a small, ordinary awkwardness, the kind you feel when you accidentally walk in on someone's private phone call, embarrassment more than suspicion. It was only later, turning the moment over and over in my mind the way you turn a stone looking for the smooth side, that the awkwardness curdled into something else. When Megan rounded the corner, her thumb was already moving across her screen. And I noticed, though I didn't think much of it at the time, that she didn't just lock the phone. She opened a different app first, scrolled for half a second, then locked it. The specific motion of someone clearing a notification before anyone else could glimpse it. Her smile came a half second too late, the way a smile does when someone has to remember to perform it instead of it simply happening. 2 weeks before the party, I mentioned the phone call to my sister Claire, who lived 40 minutes away in Xenia and worked as a paralegal, which meant she had a mind that noticed inconsistencies the way other people noticed bad smells. Immediately and with visible discomfort, we were sitting on her back porch with a bottle of unopened wine between us because Claire knew I barely drank and never pushed me, and I told her about the unlocked door. The 4 words, the smile that didn't reach Megan's eyes. Claire didn't say much at first. She just asked me a question. She asked, "Has Jason seemed different to you, distracted, distant, anything like that?" And I said, "No, not really, just busy with the shop." Claire nodded slowly and said, "Okay." And I remember thinking her okay sounded like the kind of okay that meant she was filing something away for later, the way she probably filed away testimony inconsistencies at work. I almost let it go completely after that conversation. I want to be honest with you about that because this isn't a story where I was some brilliant detective the whole way through. There were nights in May where I lay awake turning the unlocked door over in my mind and then told myself I was being paranoid, that I was the daughter of a man who drank himself into unpredictability, and maybe I had inherited his instinct to expect the floor to fall out from under me even when it wasn't going to. I almost apologized to Megan for even having the thought. I actually typed out a text one night that said, "Hey, sorry if I seemed weird when I stopped by. Everything okay with you?" And then I deleted it before sending, because some small, stubborn part of me wanted to see what she would do if I didn't ask. What she did was invite me to get manicures the following Tuesday and spend the entire appointment talking about the party, about the string lights she'd ordered, about how she'd found the perfect signature cocktail recipe, something with elderflower and gin that she wanted to surprise me with as a little tribute to us. And I sat there letting a stranger paint my nails a soft blush pink and felt like the luckiest woman in Ohio to have a friend who cared this much. That's the part that still makes my stomach turn, looking back. How much care it took to build the thing that was about to destroy me. The turn, the moment everything got worse happened 10 days before the party. And it happened by accident, the way most true things do. Jason and I were at his apartment, and his phone buzzed on the coffee table while he was in the shower. And normally I never touch his phone. We'd never been the kind of couple who checked each other's messages. We didn't need to be. But the screen lit up with a notification banner, and the name on it was Meg, no last name, just Meg. And the preview text said, "Don't forget 7 sharp, and I don't know what's real if you're late." My hands went cold. Not because a text from Megan to Jason was inherently damning. They were friends too, in a group of 3 that had always been fine. It was the words. "I don't know what's real if you're late." That sentence didn't belong to logistics. That sentence belonged to something with weight. I didn't say anything to Jason that night. I told myself I was going to wait, watch, gather more before I said a single word, because I had learned a long time ago that accusations without proof just give guilty people time to build a better story. So I started paying attention in a way I hadn't let myself before. I noticed that Jason had in fact been leaving the shop around 6 most evenings, not staying late at all, which meant the excuse about being short-staffed didn't line up with what I could see plainly on the shop's public hours posted right there on the door. I noticed that Megan had started referring to the party as if she had some larger plan for it, saying things like, "Trust me, this night is going to change everything," in a tone that made my skin prickle, even though on paper, it was just enthusiasm for event planning. I called Claire again. This time I didn't cry. I just laid out the pieces: the unlocked door, the 4 words, the Meg text, the mismatched hours. Claire listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said something I've never forgotten. She said, "Ashley, you're not crazy, and I need you to hear that first before anything else. Something is happening here that you're not being told about, and the 2 people closest to you are the ones not telling you." I asked her what I was supposed to do with that, because knowing something is wrong and knowing what to do about it are 2 completely different problems. And Claire, ever the paralegal, ever the person who thought in terms of documentation and burden of proof, told me something that reframed the entire situation for me. She said, "You're not building a case to convict anyone in a courtroom. Ashley, you're building a case to convict your own doubt, because right now the only person you actually have to convince is yourself, and the version of you that wants to apologize for noticing things is going to fight you on this every step of the way." She was right about that last part more than I wanted her to be. There was a particular voice in my head during those weeks, quiet but persistent, that sounded almost like my mother's voice, the one that had spent decades making excuses for my father's Friday nights. And that voice kept telling me that good women don't go looking for reasons to distrust the people who love them. That suspicion itself was a kind of betrayal, that if I was wrong about Megan, I would never be able to take back the damage of having doubted her at all. I had to consciously push that voice aside every single day for 2.5 weeks, and some nights it was harder than others, especially the nights when Megan would call just to talk about nothing, about a show she was watching or a coworker who'd annoyed her, sounding so entirely like herself, so entirely like the girl who'd handed me tissues in a hospital parking lot, that I'd hang up the phone and think, "There's no way, there's just no way." And then I'd remember the 4 words and the mismatched hours and make myself keep watching anyway. We made a plan together that night, the 2 of us at her kitchen table with a legal pad, because Claire's instinct, honed by years of watching lawyers build cases, was that I needed something concrete before I confronted anyone, something I could point to that couldn't be explained away with a shrug and a change of subject. I wasn't trying to trap anyone. I want to be clear about that. I was trying to protect myself from being gaslit into believing my own perception was broken, which is a thing that happens to women more often than anyone talks about. The plan had 3 parts. First, I would talk to the bartender Megan had hired for the party, a young guy named Derek who worked events through a staffing agency, and I would ask him quietly before the party even started to keep an eye on my specific drink and tell me honestly if anyone besides the 2 of us handled it. Second, I would ask my cousin Priya, who worked in IT and understood phones better than anyone I knew, to help me if I ever needed to recover deleted messages or verify a video's metadata, because Claire had warned me that if this went where she suspected it might, digital proof would matter more than anyone's word. Third, and this was the hardest part, I would keep acting exactly the same around Megan and Jason for the next 10 days. Warm, trusting, unsuspicious. Because the moment either of them sensed I knew something, whatever they were planning would either accelerate or disappear, and I needed to see it play out to understand what I was actually dealing with. Priya, my cousin, turned out to be the one who kept the whole plan from feeling like paranoia dressed up as strategy. She was 29, worked in IT support for a hospital system in Dayton, and had the specific dry humor of someone who spent her days explaining to doctors why turning the computer off and on again actually was the solution. When Claire called her and explained what we needed, Priya didn't hesitate, didn't ask a dozen cautious questions. She just said, "Send me what you've got, and I'll tell you what's real and what's noise," in the same tone she probably used when a nurse called about a printer. She drove out to meet me at a coffee shop in Beaver Creek 2 days before the party, laptop already open before she'd even sat down, and walked me through exactly what metadata was, how a video file carries a hidden timestamp and device signature that most people never think to check, how easy it would be if this went where we suspected, to prove when something was actually recorded versus when someone claimed it happened. That coffee shop conversation gave me one of the only genuinely lighter moments in those 2.5 weeks. At one point, Priya looked up from her laptop, deadly serious, and said, "You know, if this really is what we think it is, your maid of honor picked possibly the worst friend group to do this in. Because between a paralegal and someone who fixes hospital servers for a living, she basically assembled her own opposition." I laughed for the first time in days, a real laugh, the kind that startled me a little because I hadn't expected my body to still be capable of it. Claire, sitting next to me, raised her coffee cup like a toast and said, "Two overqualified best friends." And for about 10 minutes, sitting in that coffee shop with the two of them, I felt something closer to safe than I had in weeks. There was a night, about 5 days before the party, where I almost broke that plan completely. Jason and I were eating dinner at his kitchen table, spaghetti he'd made from a jar sauce because neither of us could cook much better than that, and he reached across the table and took my hand and said, "I can't wait to marry you, you know that, right?" And his face was so open and so unguarded that every ounce of suspicion in me wanted to evaporate. I wanted so badly to believe that the man in front of me, the one who'd fixed my tire and never once made me feel small in 3 years, couldn't possibly be part of something ugly. I almost told him everything right there. I almost said, "Jason, who is Meg texting you at 7 o'clock about, and what does I don't know what's real mean?" I didn't. I squeezed his hand back and said, I couldn't wait either, and I hated myself a little for how easy the lie came out, and I hated the situation more for making me lie to a man I loved in order to find out whether he deserved that love at all. The night of the party arrived hot and bright, one of those early June evenings in Ohio, where the light stretches out golden slow until almost 9. The barn venue was strung with the lights Megan had promised, mason jars glowing on every table, about 70 guests milling around in sundresses and button-downs, my mother crying happy tears within the first 20 minutes, Jason's brother giving a toast that made everyone laugh about the tire shop origin story. For about an hour, I let myself actually enjoy it. I danced with Jason under the string lights, and for a few minutes, I forgot to be careful. I remember the smell of the barn, hay, and citronella candles, and someone's perfume that was too sweet for the heat. And I remember thinking, in that hour before everything happened, that this was the kind of night I would want to remember for the rest of my life. My mother's laugh carrying across the room, Jason's hand warm against the small of my back, string lights doubling themselves in the dusk. I let myself believe, just for that hour, that maybe I'd built an entire case out of nothing, that maybe the unlocked door and the 4 words, and the mismatched hours were just the anxious pattern-making of a woman whose father had taught her to expect disaster. I almost wanted to be wrong. I think some part of me was hoping, right up until Derek found me by the drinks table, that I was about to feel foolish for ever doubting the 2 people I loved most. Derek was younger than I expected when Megan had first mentioned hiring a bartender through the staffing agency. Maybe 23, with the specific calm efficiency of someone who'd worked enough weddings and parties to have seen every possible version of chaos a night could produce. He wore a black button-down with the agency's small embroidered logo on the chest pocket, and when he pulled me aside, he did it smoothly, professionally, asking about garnish preferences in a voice pitched for anyone nearby to overhear, while what he actually said, low and fast, was different entirely. Derek the bartender found me around 8:15, pulled me aside near the drinks table under the excuse of asking about garnish preferences, and told me quietly that a woman matching Megan's description had come behind the bar twice already, once to, quote, help restock, and once specifically asking which glass was mine, a detail Derek said struck him as odd enough to remember. since no other guest had asked that all night. He said he'd been keeping my glass, a specific one with a small chip near the rim that I'd shown him earlier, within his own sightline since then, and that nothing had touched it except what he poured himself. That was the confirmation I needed, and it was also the moment my hands started shaking, because knowing something in theory and watching it happen in front of you in real time are two very different kinds of knowing. At 8:40, Megan appeared at my elbow with a new drink in hand, something pale gold in a coupe glass, and said, "Okay, this is it. The signature cocktail, elderflower gin. Made it just for tonight. You have to try it before anyone else does." Her smile was enormous. Her eyes, when I really looked at them, had a brightness that felt performative, like someone watching to see if a plan was working. She held the glass out with both hands, the way you'd present something ceremonial, and said, "I've been waiting all week to give you this," and there was something in the way she said waiting that made the hair on my arms stand up, because it didn't sound like the waiting of someone excited to share a recipe. It sounded like the waiting of someone counting down to a moment they'd rehearsed. I took the glass. I raised it to my lips, close enough to smell the sharp floral sweetness of the elderflower, close enough that if anyone had been watching from across the room, they would have sworn they saw me drink. And I did not drink it, because Derek had already replaced the drink in my other hand, the one Megan hadn't seen, with plain soda water and lime that looked identical to the vodka soda I'd been nursing all night. I lowered the coupe glass an inch below my mouth, tilted my head back just slightly the way you do when you're actually swallowing something, and set it down on the nearest table with my fingers trembling so hard I nearly knocked it over. Megan was already watching someone else by then, scanning the crowd, and I understood, watching her scan, that she was looking for witnesses, positioning herself to be seen near me at exactly the right moment. I want you to understand what it felt like to stand there, smiling, pretending to sip a drink I believed had been tampered with, while the person I'd called my best friend for 7 years watched my face with an expression I can only describe as hungry. I excused myself to the restroom 5 minutes later and poured the untouched coupe glass into the sink, then slipped the empty glass into a small bag Priya had given me for exactly this purpose, sealed inside a sandwich bag with a paper towel underneath so nothing would slosh. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the bag zipped. I told myself, almost like a prayer, just get through tonight. Just get through tonight and you'll have what you need. What I didn't fully anticipate, because you can plan for a lot of things, but not everything, was that Megan had a second layer to whatever she was doing. Around 9:30, feeling brave because her plan wasn't visibly working, she came to find me again. And this time she wasn't holding a drink, she was holding her phone, filming, laughing, saying loudly enough for people nearby to hear, "Ashley, come on, do the thing you did at my birthday, remember, the dance." And she started playing music from her phone and pulling me by the wrist toward the center of the barn where people had gathered to watch. And I understood in that moment that if there was no drug in my system, there needed to be footage that looked like there was. I want to tell you I handled that moment perfectly, but the truth is more complicated. I was scared and confused about what was actually happening in real time, even though I'd suspected it was coming. And there is a particular kind of paralysis that sets in when someone you love is smiling at you while doing something designed to hurt you. I didn't dance wildly. I didn't do anything that would have looked incriminating on its own. But Megan filmed anyway, close on my face, at unflattering angles, for almost 4 minutes, narrating under her breath things like, "Oh my gosh, are you okay? You seem so out of it," in a voice pitched just loud enough for her phone's microphone to pick up clearly, building a soundtrack for a story that hadn't happened. That footage went out at 11:47 that night, while I was already gone, already dropped off by my cousin Priya at a hotel near the venue, because I'd told Jason I felt sick and needed air, which wasn't even a lie. The caption Megan wrote, the one I would read the next morning along with 43 messages, said, "So worried about my best friend tonight. Hope she's okay, praying for her." A caption engineered to look like concern while functioning as an accusation, sent to a group chat of nearly 40 mutual friends and family members, including Jason's mother, including my own mother, including 3 of my coworkers. Waking up the next morning wasn't actually in a stranger's house. I'd exaggerated nothing on purpose that first sentence, that was true. It was in the hotel room I'd checked into myself, alone, and it was my own dress I found inside out because I'd changed quickly into pajamas the night before and thrown it on a chair without thinking. But that didn't matter to the 43 messages waiting for me, half of them concerned, half of them cruel, one from Jason's mother that simply said, "We need to talk," one from a coworker that said, "Wow, didn't know you had that side to you," and one, the one that made me actually sit down on the hotel bathroom floor, from Jason himself, sent at 1 a.m., that read, "Megan showed me the video. I don't even know what to say right now. I called Claire before I called anyone else. She picked up on the first ring, like she'd been waiting, and I told her everything. And she said 4 words that steadied me more than anything else could have in that moment. She said, 'We have proof, Ashley.' We did. We had the sealed glass with whatever residue was inside it, which Priya had already photographed with timestamps before I even got in the car. We had Derek's phone number and his willingness to give a written statement, because he told me later that watching someone try to drug a bride-to-be at her own engagement party had made him sick to his stomach, and he wasn't about to stay quiet for a $150 bartending fee. We had, most importantly, the video itself, which Priya downloaded and ran through a basic metadata check before it could be deleted or edited further, confirming the original file's timestamp and the fact that no substance had actually altered my behavior in the footage at all. Just Megan's narration doing the work her editing couldn't. The plan Claire and I built that hotel morning wasn't about revenge in the way people usually mean that word. It was about making sure the truth existed somewhere Megan couldn't talk her way around it. We decided against confronting her privately because privately was exactly the environment where she'd always operated best, where her charm and her tears and her careful words could reshape a conversation until I was the one apologizing. We decided the reveal needed witnesses, the same way her accusation had needed witnesses, except this time, the truth would be doing the talking. The bridal shower, already scheduled for the following Saturday at my mother's house, 3 weeks before the wedding date, we still at that point weren't sure would happen, became the setting neither Megan nor I expected it to be. Jason and I talked for the first time 4 days after the party, in his apartment, both of us exhausted in different ways. I laid the pieces out for him the way Claire had taught me: calm, sequential, undeniable. The unlocked door, the Meg texts, the mismatched shop hours, which he confirmed, red-faced, admitting he'd been meeting Megan for coffee those evenings because she'd told him she was worried I was drinking too much lately and wanted his help watching me, which was, I realized in that moment, the seed she'd been planting for months, preparing him to believe whatever story she eventually told. I showed him Derek's statement. I showed him the sealed glass, still in Priya's evidence bag in my refrigerator. I watched his face change from confusion to disbelief to something that looked like grief. Grief for the version of his oldest friend he'd thought he knew. He asked me one question that night that mattered more than any other. He asked, why would she do this? And I told him what Claire and I had pieced together in the days since, which was ugly but not complicated. Before I answer that, I want to tell you what those 4 days between the party and that conversation actually felt like, because I think people imagine a moment like that as clean, as if you simply gather your evidence and then calmly present it and everyone nods and understands. It wasn't clean. It was 4 days of me sitting in a hotel room and then my sister's guest room, watching my phone light up with messages I couldn't bring myself to answer, watching the video get shared further than I could track, watching a coworker post a vague, concerned status about toxic behavior that everyone who knew me understood was about me without my name ever being mentioned. It was 4 days of my own mother calling to ask, gently, carefully, if I was doing okay, in a tone that told me even she wasn't entirely sure what to believe yet. And hearing that uncertainty in my own mother's voice broke something in me that took a long time to fully repair. It was 4 days of Jason not calling at all, and the silence from him hurt worse than any of the messages, because silence from someone who's supposed to know you completely feels like a verdict. Megan had been in significant credit card debt for over a year, debt she'd hidden from everyone, including me. And 3 months before our engagement party, she'd started, quietly, developing feelings for Jason that had nothing to do with friendship. Feelings she'd apparently decided she could act on if she could just make me look unstable enough, unreliable enough, that a broken engagement wouldn't seem like a tragedy to anyone, just an inevitability. The texts, "Don't forget 7 sharp, and I don't know what's real if you're late," hadn't been about logistics at all. They'd been about a plan to meet Jason without me, again and again, small deposits into an account of doubt she was building in his mind, so that by the time the drugged drink and the video landed, he'd already have some quiet, unconscious permission to believe the worst about me. Jason didn't defend her. I want you to know that, because I think it matters, especially for anyone listening to this who's ever wondered whether the person they love will choose comfort over truth when truth is inconvenient. He sat with his head in his hands for a long time, and then he looked up and said, "I need to help you finish this, whatever this is, because she doesn't get to do this and just walk away smiling." The bridal shower was Megan's event too, in the sense that she'd been the one organizing the guest list, the games, the seating chart, still playing maid of honor with a confidence that told me she genuinely believed she'd won, that the video had done its job, and I'd spend the coming weeks fighting an unwinnable battle against a story that had already spread faster than any correction could catch it. She arrived that Saturday in a soft yellow dress, hugging my mother at the door, complimenting the decorations, and when she saw me, she pulled me into a hug and said quietly, close to my ear, "I'm so glad you're doing better," in a tone that managed to sound both sympathetic and like a small private threat, a reminder that she still believed she controlled the narrative. We waited until the gift opening had finished, until most of the 30 or so women in my mother's backyard had a mimosa in hand and their attention loosely gathered, and then Claire, who I'd asked to help facilitate because I trusted her steadiness more than my own in that moment, stood up near the gift table and said she had a short video she wanted to share. A nice compilation someone had put together from the engagement party. Megan's face, I remember this clearly, lit up with a kind of pride, assuming, I think, that this was footage of her own making finally getting the wider audience she wanted. What played on the small portable projector Claire had set up wasn't Megan's video. It was Derek's own footage, time-stamped, taken discreetly on his phone from behind the bar at my specific request that night, showing Megan reaching across the bar twice, showing her handing me the coupe glass, showing seconds later my untouched sip and the swap Derek had quietly performed. Underneath it, Claire read aloud, calm and clear, the written statement Derek had given. And then she read the timestamp data confirming when Megan's own video had actually been recorded, proving the narration about me seeming out of it didn't match footage where I was visibly, obviously, completely sober. The backyard went silent in a way I'd never heard 30 women go silent before. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Jason's mother, sitting near the front, turned slowly to look at Megan with an expression that had gone from confusion to something like disgust. And Megan, for the first time in the 7 years I'd known her, had absolutely nothing to say. She stood up, knocking her mimosa glass off the table, and said my name once, Ashley, in a voice that cracked in the middle, reaching for an explanation that never came, because there wasn't one that would have survived what everyone had just seen with their own eyes. I didn't yell. I want you to know that, because I think the version of this story where I scream and cry and throw something is the version people expect, and it's not what happened. I stood up and I looked at her and I said, "You spent 3 months building a version of me that didn't exist so you could take something that was never yours to take. And I hope whatever you were chasing was worth losing every single person in this yard who used to love you." Then I asked her to leave. She left. She didn't fight it, didn't defend herself further because there was nothing left to defend. I heard later through the same group chat that had once carried her carefully worded concern about my well-being that she'd moved to Cincinnati within 2 months, that the friendship group we'd shared had almost universally cut contact with her once the full story got around, that Derek's statement combined with the metadata evidence had been enough for me to file a police report about the attempted drugging, which resulted in an ongoing investigation, though I'd never learned its final outcome because by then, I'd made a conscious decision to stop tracking her life at all. The wedding happened 4 months later than originally planned, not because Jason and I broke up, but because we both needed the extra time, needed therapy separately and together, needed to rebuild a kind of trust that had been damaged, even though neither of us had been the one to damage it. We got married in October instead of June, in the same barn venue actually, because Jason insisted the place shouldn't belong to what Megan tried to do there. It should belong to us instead. And I understood what he meant, and I agreed. The therapy mattered more than I expected it to going in. I'd always thought of therapy as something for after the worst had already happened, a kind of cleanup. But our counselor, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Patterson, who worked out of a small practice in Beaver Creek, helped me understand something I hadn't been able to name on my own, which was that the hardest part of what Megan did wasn't the drugging attempt, or even the video. It was the way it had trained me for those 4 days to doubt my own red on people I loved. And that kind of doubt doesn't heal just because the truth eventually comes out in a backyard full of witnesses. I had to relearn, slowly, that noticing things was not the same as being unstable. And Jason had to relearn, on his own timeline, how to sit with the guilt of having believed, even briefly, a story that wasn't true about someone who had never once given him a real reason to doubt her before that summer. I saw Megan exactly once more after the bridal shower, by accident, at a gas station, off E75 the following spring, nearly a year later. She was filling up a car I didn't recognize, and for a moment our eyes met across the pumps, and I watched something flicker across her face that might have been shame or might have been something closer to resentment. I couldn't tell, and I didn't stay long enough to find out. I didn't say anything to her. I got back in my car and drove home to Jason, and I didn't think about her again for a long time after that, which felt more than any dramatic confrontation ever could have, like the actual ending of the story. I think about that morning in the hotel room sometimes. The 43 messages, the dress inside out, the particular kind of fear that comes from realizing the story being told about you is a lie you can't outrun by simply telling the truth louder. What I learned and what I want to leave you with if you've stayed this long is that your instincts are not paranoia. If something in you notices a door that's suddenly locked when it never used to be, or 4 words caught through a hallway, or a smile that doesn't quite reach someone's eyes, that noticing is not a character flaw and it is not you being difficult or dramatic. It is information. The women who tried to warn me not to trust that feeling, even the well-meaning ones, were wrong, and the sister who told me you're not crazy, something is happening here, was the only person who gave me what I actually needed, which was permission to trust myself. I didn't win by being loud. I won by being patient enough to let the truth catch up to the lie, and by refusing to let someone else's cruelty convince me that I was the unstable one in the story. If you ever find yourself standing in a room full of people who think they know what happened to you, remember that the truth doesn't need you to defend it loudly. It just needs you to keep it safe long enough to be seen. Jason and I have been married 2 years now. We don't talk about that summer often, but every once in a while, usually late at night, one of us will bring it up. Not out of old pain, but almost the way you'd revisit a storm you both survived, checking to make sure the other person still remembers it the same way. He told me once that the hardest thing he'd ever had to forgive himself for wasn't believing the video. Not exactly, it was the 4 days of silence. The way doubt had made him go quiet instead of coming to me directly and asking. I told him I understood that silence better than he thought because I'd spent those same 4 days doubting whether I even had the right to defend myself against a story that had already spread faster than I could run. We built our marriage, in the end, on the specific, hard-won understanding that love isn't measured by never doubting each other. It's measured by what you do the next time doubt shows up, whether you go looking for the truth together or let someone else write it for you.